At this point, I would like to invite each panelist to give some opening remarks, perhaps 5 to 7 minutes. And I will do it in this order: Dr. Charles, then Dr. Clark, and then Ms. Fergus. Dr. Charles, over to you at this point.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to your forum. This topic this evening is extremely interesting, not only from the context of what we have been experiencing over the last 2 years or so with respect to or having to pivot to the online environment because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but certainly because in this 21st century where we are certainly smack dab in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, the digital revolution. And life as we know it today in 2022 is certainly extremely different from what most of us would have experienced growing up. And I think when we look at those two areas, the fact that we are in the fourth industrial revolution, we are in the digital age, and then the fact that we would have had to rely heavily on a digital context for the delivery of both teaching and learning, we can see how relevant any thrust with respect to digital education is. When we first started at the Ministry of Education recently, when we started to talk about going back to the face-to-face environment, I was a bit alarmed because I understood that some teachers said, oh no, that means I wasted my subscription on Nearpod, or, all the things that I was learning, I now have to put them behind me because I have to go back to chalk and talk. I have to go back to the textbook. And we were somewhat alarmed because we were hoping, and we are hoping, that teachers today recognize that they were not only required to update and upgrade their skills with respect to digital technology and what we call digital literacy, being able to function and operate in a digital environment, having the literacy or the skill or the competency to operate in a digital environment, that they would not have just seen it as a prerequisite or as something that was necessary because of COVID, but that they would see it as being integral to the type of lives that we live today. If any of us have to be honest today, we would know that our lives have changed remarkably, even in terms of how we connect with people. We connect with people via our social media platforms. We connect via email. We watch so many things online. We don't just rely on our television stations anymore. We shop online. Some people even date online. And the presence of digital technology and its pervasiveness in our 21st century has altered the way we engage with living. And at what other place would we expect not to see that type of adjustment and development, but in the area of education? And certainly, my premise has always been that in the same way we have held to a very high we've held in very high esteem traditional literacy. We've held traditional literacy. We know we've heard of the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. In the 20th century, we've held at a very high regard traditional literacy and the need to read as a prerequisite for functioning in society. So no matter what type of job you plan to have, whether you planned to be an artisan, an artist, or some other type of professional, you needed literacy to function. My premise today is that we need to leverage the idea of digital literacy as a prerequisite, a very current and necessary literacy that all people of all ages, of all backgrounds, needed to be able to sink their teeth into in order to function in today's digital world, because we are living in a world that is entirely digital. And so there is much value that can be had from the embracing of digital technology and from the level of the Ministry of Education. Certainly, we are very interested in having our teachers trained in being able to function in digital environments, in being able to engage their students utilizing the technology. And it's not just a matter of using the technology as a tool for communication that is very critical, but also using it as a tool for collaboration, using it as a tool for curation, for the gathering of information, and also to be able to create. And I think this is where we are most interested, because one of the areas that emerged out of my study was that in the Caribbean, there is this perspective that we are not so big on being digital innovators and creators, that we seem to be pretty comfortable with just copying what we see, what we gauge, what we take in from the online environment. And certainly the direction that we're going in with respect to training both our students and teachers is about empowering them, and by extension, the larger society, because our students are going to go into the larger society and be functioning adults working in various sectors, etc. And we want to empower them with the ability to create in the digital environment, so that you're not just imbibing and taking in what is being spouted by a very global village. And we understand that we are in a global village. The world is flat. We are all being impacted by this very global society, especially in the online environment. As I say to people, when you go on TikTok, you can't tell who's from where. You know, everybody's doing the same things. But we think it is critical that in the Caribbean, as a small island developing state, a country like Barbados, we need to be grounded in who we are. We need to understand our identity, even within the context of a digital exploration, and be able to leverage who we are as Barbadian citizens and as Caribbean citizens in that digital space. So when I hear about digital education and digital development, I get very, very excited, because there are so many facets to it. It is not just about how we teach and how we learn. It's about how we do, how we live our lives every day, and more so how we take care of ourselves, because there's something called digital identity and well-being, how we take care of ourselves in the digital space, and then how we preserve our digital identity, even in terms of our values and morals, and also in terms of our national identity. So there are many aspects of this that I would be very interested in discussing this evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles, for your opening remarks. And I will turn out to Reverend Dr. Michael Clark. Your opening remarks, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you for having me in this presentation. This is a very important topic that we are looking at this evening, and I know that by the time we are finished, various aspects of it will be presented, and we will probably have a wider understanding of what it is that you're talking about. As I reflected on this particular topic, I am taken back, in a sense, by the various aspects of it that need to come to the table. Because what we're dealing with is, we're dealing with a tool. We're dealing with a tool, and the tool has a multiplicity of applications. It is a tool. It is one of those tools, and I think it's probably the most recent tool that has been so extensive, because there is digitalization in every sphere of human endeavor. And in reality, this is perhaps the first time that technology has presented the world with a tool that it has the capacity to enter into every fabric, every aspect of our life, and be meaningful and make a significant contribution, and not just be something that is being dragged into something just because it's there, but being able to make a significant impact, from education to health to the whole idea of engaging oneself, who one is, etc. And so when one then begins to talk about the future, it is interesting, because we are here because the pandemic struck and we found ourselves in this significant challenge. But there is the reality that our young people were here long before we were here. And we were trying to get them to not be here. We spent a lot of our time in all sorts of public announcements and showing all kinds of videos of young people around the table and everybody on their own smartphone. And we were annoyed about their inability to socialize properly, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden now, the tables have turned, and we are promoting this. And to some extent, might very well be forgetting some of the challenges that it presented in the past, with now that we are so excited about its application, and now that we're now getting on board, we may very well be forgetting some of the things that we had a challenge with, and this is something that we have to be very mindful of. So we find ourselves in a situation now where the student knows more about the tool than the teacher does. And this is an interesting arena to be in, because the teacher is learning the tool and the student already knows the tool. So one might even risk the thought that the student might very well get a little bored because the teacher is taking a little bit of time to really get with it, as it were. Or be that as it may, it is still an interesting dynamic that the children are more advanced in the practicality and the utilization of this particular tool. Yet it's a tool that, as far as they are aware, it has been in their lives, it has been in every fabric of their lives, and we are now getting to understand it. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is the whole idea of reach. In the opening remarks, Father Bean made reference to studying in distance education and you having to mail things back and forth or email. I can't remember what stage you was at, but we would remember that these things went way back to when you were able to mail a course in and get your response, etc. So one of the things that this has done for us is that it has made education accessible to individuals who might not necessarily have the wherewithal to be able, for example, in terms of tertiary education, to be able to leave their country and to come to someplace else where they can attain an education. Now, we have seen through the University of West Indies that a lot of our young people from across the Caribbean have been doing just that. But we don't know of the numbers that have not been able to do that. We are not aware of the numbers that would love to have been able to do some tertiary education, but perhaps because of where they live, because of their family situation, they may or may not have been able to participate in this kind of in higher education. And so the technology then makes it somewhat more affordable. From our perspective as a theological seminary, we have situations where individuals in some of the other islands aren't able to leave their family commitments to engage in the study of theology. And so this new tool has made it possible for them to be able to sharpen their ministry and deepen what they're doing. And so it is being well embraced. So there is that sense of accessibility, which is important. And especially in a region where there is tremendous poverty, I think we have to look at it from that perspective and address the whole thing of affordability. Because yes, we have seen a lot of persons being educated in the region, but then we also need to know that there are a lot more that have not been educated, that have not had the opportunity to be educated. And therefore, digitalization of education and making it accessible has been a blessing to them. The other aspect that I find of great help is the whole idea of the experience. The video technology is amazing. It really is. The ability to bring a video clip into a class setting, and in reality, this is not only an online situation. And I found that the remark made by the teachers that was quoted by the former speaker, they're interesting because you don't have to be online to be able to bring a particular clip or something like that into a classroom setting. But nonetheless, there is this sense that there is that opportunity for a fuller experience, that you can bring more into the classroom setting, whether the classroom be virtual or face-to-face in person. So that there is that other dimension. There's a massive area that we are not addressing, or we have addressed very little in the whole conversations that have been here, and that is the health of individuals. A group of students led by one undergrad student at University of West Indies started a program during the pandemic, in the heart of the pandemic. She is from the social sciences area, looking at social work, and she wanted to get a sense of the mental health of the students. And so there was this program where students would come in and have conversations and share where they were. And a lot of information was obtained during those sessions where students felt tremendously lost. And these will be students who would be very familiar with technology, who would be in the lead with technology, knowing how to use technology, etc. But something else was playing in there. And that which was playing in there was wreaking havoc on themselves. And the whole program was then used to appoint some of the students to persons and professionals where they could get some assistance to help them to cope with this change of the environment. So we can't forget, in our enthusiasm about what this has enabled us to do, we can't forget the other side of it, the anxiety, especially with individuals who have issues, or who are borderline, or who are stressed rather easily. We can't ignore that. And at the same time, what even adds to that some more is that I don't know if you remember, but I always make the comment that there was a time when you passed through Bridgetown and it was like 6 o'clock in the evening, it was getting dark, and all the offices would be dark. There would be no lights on in any offices. And then the computers came in, and everybody figured, well, computers are going to make life easier, and we'd be able to finish our work earlier and get home earlier. But all of a sudden we realized that computers now cause us to do extended hours. So no longer was the city dark at 6 o'clock, but it now had all these little lights in there with persons doing extra work. I know that there isn't a person who wouldn't complain that since this whole pandemic, they've been attending more meetings in a day's allotment, and even beyond what is a normal day, so that somehow we have abused the technology and we have abused persons, because there is this sense now that as long as you have an internet connection, I can reach you. And if I can reach you, you should be able to show up for work. And that is wreaking havoc in another way as well. So that is also something that we need to look at as we talk about the future. I would stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Clark, for your opening remarks. And I will now turn to Ms. Fergus. Miranda, are you ready to join us and give your opening remarks?
I think that Dr. Charles and Dr. Clark have set the stage so well that my opening remarks are going to be way briefer. However, I want to say when we have textbooks, we have something called a vignette. So I'm going to start with a story of my late father. As you said, mentioned, and I do have an entertainment company, and it's called the Young Stumpy, and that is in tribute to my father, whose nickname was Stumpy. And he told, when we were small, he told of a story that when him and his brother were small, their process of learning to swim was that an older relative would take them and toss them into the water. And it kind of felt a little like that for us in the education sector when COVID tossed us into the digital age and online, using the online platform to teach. But if we really think about it, and I think that if my father had thought about it, he was being prepared to go there. It may have seemed as if it went really quickly, adjusting and having to come up to the water and float and swim and learn to swim in the moment would have been extremely seemed like an uphill climb and a maybe an insurmountable task, but they made it through. I think that many of my colleagues as teachers, we felt that way. We were learning and we were teaching at the same time. We were learning the programs that Dr. Charles referred to, and then we were using them in the classroom. But I want to frame this, and I have framed many discussions I've had with persons that are what I would call lay persons, non-teachers, is that, and I think as a society, something that we have to do is I say, we have to be honest and accountable. We have to have honesty and accountability. We have to be honest about the fact that in some schools, the provisions are not there to facilitate the physical digital education to continue. So sometimes teachers have to go above and beyond to make sure that it's continued. And that is part of our career, but what of our I don't want to say career. It's part and parcel of teaching. But we have to be honest about the fact that sometimes these schools are not equally equipped in terms of facilitating the digital education. We have to be honest about the fact that the problems that Dr. Clark just referred to in terms of anxiety and the mental health issues are not new. I always say that I love plantings, and I always say that what COVID and online teaching has done, it has peeled back what I think is sometimes blinders, that's the best term, in terms of where our education system really was. But what we can do as a society is choose to be honest about where we are. And then when we're honest about where we are, we can assess, and then we can make a plan to move forward and improve. I also really think about we as a people. I remember a time when it was that dial-up, that seeing there's a particular noise that persons of a certain age know, but persons that my great niece who's 10, she doesn't know of that. I remember when she was 2, she came and she put on my tablet, she said, "Auntie, this is my jam." And I was there trying to figure out how she found music. So as Dr. Clark said, we have to be aware that the persons that we are facilitating in education, there are jobs out there that don't exist yet. There's sectors that haven't been created yet. So what we have to do is come away from the industrialized mindset where we train the children and prepare the children for specific areas, and start to really focus on those 21st century skills, the critical thinking, the collaboration, the communication, the creativity. We have to think consciously as the elders in the society. We have to think consciously about what steps need to be taken to make sure that our children, our future, have the appropriate skills in which it is not enclosed within a particular career, but that they can do this and more. We also have to be honest about what our children want to do and who our children want to be and where they are. So I think, as I said, I'm excited to share and learn, because I'm always excited to learn about all aspects. And I'm very happy to be here to represent early childhood education as well as literacy instruction, because sometimes I find that in conversations it's very underrepresented. So I'm going to try my best today to speak for the young children. And I want to give an example of a student. On Monday, I had weekend news, and he said his news was about the fact that he was observing the war. And he spoke about the fact that it's not nice. Those persons are not nice. They're not doing nice things. So we have to be aware of, we as the adults are no longer the sole sources of information for our students. So we have to be able to train them in those critical thinking skills, and they have to be able to collaborate with us and their peers here and in the global village to be able to make Barbados the best that it can be and maximize their full potential, and then a turn help Barbados to maximize its full potential. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so very much, Verona. And I will perhaps at this point, give the panelists the opportunity to comment on anything that your fellow panelists would have said, and then we can go from there. Dr. Charles, Dr. Clark, Randy, you wanted to comment on anything else that your fellow panelists would have raised at this point?
Okay, I just want to bring some clarity. I know there's a perception out there, especially in the public domain, that teachers were clueless when it came to technology, and that the children were the ones who were so advanced that the teachers found themselves, sinking and not being able to swim. And that is not actually borne up in any research, including right here in Barbados. What we found, there's a notion called digital immigrants and digital natives, meaning that the natives are those who are born within this time of technology, and we older people are the immigrants. However, it has been found that there are many older and middle-aged people who are quite technologically savvy. And what the children perhaps were more advanced in would be the use of social media, and not necessarily how to utilize the technology in the learning space. Because our experience has been, and lots of teachers have complained about this, that students could not figure out, and this is children at the secondary level, obviously, and at the primary level, did not know how to attach documents to emails, did not even know how to respond to emails, how to download photos, how to upload assignments. And teachers would have to repeatedly tell them what to do, and they were still lost in many respects. And this is why, when we think of digital education, we have to think of what are the skills and competencies that we want our students to have as they operate in the digital space. So when we think of digital education, we're not just thinking of the computer, or we're not just thinking of the online platforms as the tool, but we're thinking of the user of the technology, and of the user of the technology being able to operate in the space because he or she has been empowered with a set of skills, with a set of competencies that would allow them to operate adequately. And we're not saying that teachers know everything, but what we have found is that many teachers know how to know. They know how to investigate. They know how to do their research. They know how to find the requisite courses and self-development and professional development tools and activities. The ministry would have exposed them to several. We trained some of our teachers in a collaboration with Tampere University out of Finland through sponsorship from the IDB. We were able to train several teachers in the development of digital pedagogies. And that simply means, what are the strategies they must use to teach online? Because when you're teaching a child face-to-face, how you will plan your lesson, how you will plan your activities differs entirely from what you will do in the online environment, or even in a blended environment where you're doing some online and allowing them to work asynchronously and doing others on their own without your direct interaction. So there's a different strategy or different set of strategies that teachers must use. And that is perhaps where the greatest challenge has been in terms of helping teachers. And a lot of teachers have been picking up and getting it. But it is not that the teachers are behind with technology and that the students are ahead. That's a myth. Many students did not have a clue and do not have a clue with respect to how to utilize the technology for teaching and learning. They may know to go on Instagram, they know to post to Instagram, they know to use TikTok, etc. But it's not the same. And not that you cannot use those tools, because that's another thing as well. Teachers can expand their repertoire in terms of what they use. You don't only have to use what we would see as traditional educational applications. So there are some traditional educational applications, like Kahoot and Peer Deck and so on, Nearpod, things that the teachers would use in the classroom, or they may use YouTube videos, etc. but that does not stop there. Teachers can use IG, they can use Twitter, they can use TikTok if they want to. They can get innovative and use any tool, the ones that the children are very familiar with. They can also use them for teaching and learning. So it is a really very complex thing. And I agree very much with what Dr. Clark said with respect to the self-care. And that is actually a part of digital education. So when I speak of literacy and digital literacy, I am not just speaking about being able to use the digital tools. I'm speaking about that. I'm speaking about you're having access to those tools. You're being able to develop your competencies and skills in a variety of ways. And also you're taking care of yourself in the digital environment. So that's a part of the literacy. When you are digitally literate, you know about screen time, you know about ergonomics, you know about how to sit in front of the computer, how to hold your body, how to hold your arms to the table, etc. You know about being able to log yourself in and out. You know about netiquette, how to speak to people online, how not to use all caps because that seems as if you're shouting. So all of that is a part of digital identity and well-being. It's a part of the whole literacy paradigm. So that's what we are very engaged with at the ministry. If you're going to push digital education forward, both in our present and our future, we have to teach all of our constituents, teachers, students, and even parents how to operate safely and productively in the digital environment.
Let me just jump in. Oops.
Yeah, Dr. Clark, go ahead, please.
Yeah, let me just jump in here, and I take all that was said, and I think it was so much indicating that teachers were out to sea as such, but it just reminds you of the image of back a few years where they had these persons who used to use something called a typewriter, and with the typewriter, you had to count this amount of spaces. You had to know how that in order the date went so many spaces from the top, and then you left so many spaces, and you indented so much, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a lot of technical thing that you had to learn about that. Computers came, and all of a sudden, all that measurement, all that stuff that you had to learn before you could actually be given a letter to do went through the window, and a new standard was developed. All I'm saying is that one of the things that we have to be very mindful of is that, and we have to be honest about it. And I think this person was making this point that we got to be mindful of the fact that we are standing in yesterday and trying to address what tomorrow will be, and not having a clue of what tomorrow will be. We use the term, those persons who are born with the technology. Well, there's a sense in which those persons who are born with the technology might very well be taking the technology where they want the technology to be taken. And in all fairness and reality, while many of the traditional standards might not have been transferable to them at this point in time, there's also the reality that the folks out there who are pushing the technology, the first folks who are writing programs, et cetera, to a large extent are writing programs for these individuals who are born in the technology, and who when they want to know if something works, they don't call in we, the adults from the community, and say, could you test this software for us and tell us if it serves your purpose? Oftentimes they call in the youngsters and say, well, you like this, see if this works. It's interesting if you go on YouTube and you see that all these youngsters out there are making videos and making lots of money from just making a video. So that there's about some product, or whether it's a hair product, etc. It's so the tables are turning. There's a shift going on, and we've got to ask ourselves too, what is it that we're educating our children for, right? I say to my students at the college here, I'm trying to educate. I'm trying to prepare you for a church that has not yet been birthed, right? And I need your help more, and it's just as much as you need mine to be able to navigate that new church, that new expression. And I think that's where we are. You know, the technology is at our doorstep, and before we're able to learn it properly, I mean, everybody knows that before you're able to handle the fullness of one operating system, there's another one there that makes the one you are using obsolete. So even that learning curve is just bananas. So there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, and it is not that one is obsolete or whatever. It's just that there are a lot of moving parts. And we've got to be able to appreciate that there are a lot of moving parts. I think that was my main point.
If I could jump in here, as I said, I'm gonna fit small stories in my conversation tonight, and I want to share a story, and then I'm gonna try to bring it back. I'm gonna bring it back. So I was assigned to a school, and it was placed in a hall, and on Sundays there was a church in the hall. So every Friday, I had to pack my classroom together. I had a infant class, and what I decided to do was that we would work together as a group, safely, of course, to pack the classroom together. So I remember there was an occasion where my group had to move to another class. And I laughed because my class became so efficient in moving safely appropriate furniture for their age that I saw the difference between that class, who had the experience, the time to develop, to work on, to build the skills necessary, that there was a distinct difference. So I'm saying that to say, back to what Dr. Charles was saying, or pulling an aspect of what she was saying, and she said in her opening remarks. I think that one of the things that we have to understand as the digital immigrants is that our students, the ones that are born in it, a lot of them, they are not working on conceptual understanding. So when you understand a concept of something, anything at all, you can take that information and apply it to higher levels or lower levels. When you truly have a conceptual understanding of something, it is my assertion that we as a culture are such in the realm of being consumers and not creators. Yep. It also impacts how we use
the technology.
So I see the head nod, Dr. Charles. You know, I'm glad to see that head nod. So when the children all of the time, when we, the students, our digital, what was the term you said, Dr. Charles? The ones that I know,
but they call them digital natives. Well,
natives, digital natives. Yeah. I would say, just from informal observations in our educational environment, they were consumers. So when they were consuming, they watched, they took in, they engaged with the games, the media as a consumer, and not the thought to be a creator. I actually am on TikTok, and I'm happy to see that there are some Asian person on TikTok, and they're trying to be creative. What we, and I say we, especially as an early childhood practitioner, what is important and key for us in that accountability is that we start to think actively about what skills a child needs to have those critical thinking skills, to be creative, to be able to produce those things, as Dr. Clark said, that we do not know of as yet. Does anybody remember that there was a job called a BlackBerry technician? And how the BlackBerry technician was the lifeblood at some point for many people. I know does BlackBerry still even exist? So we have.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just saying that it has to begin somewhere. And when you are an educator, you have to begin to think in the mindset of being creative yourself. Okay. I know that there are different levels and different types of creativity, and everybody may not be a creative person, but I think it is, well, creative in a particular type of way. You know, they may be creative in another type. But I think that when it comes to exposing our students to what they are capable of doing, that it is required that educators, that teachers, that schools model this entire idea. Let me give you an example. At some point, I was teaching for the University of the West Indies, and I wanted my students to answer something that they had to, and this was an online course. So I wasn't even teaching face-to-face. I was teaching using the technology, teaching using the Blackboard platform. And I wanted them to answer a question, but I didn't want them to submit the assignment as they normally would. I got them to create a blog, right? They had to go and find a blog platform. They had to create a blog. They had to find out how to use it, how to figure out how to do it, create the blog, post their articles, post their photographs, just as you would see when you went on a website. And they were able to do that because I have several blogs. They could have referenced my blogs. I was comfortable teaching them how to do it because it is something that I do. And I think it is something that, so I think we need to take the question of age out of the entire digital discussion, because when you go on YouTube, you will find YouTube experts of all kinds of ages. I have a YouTube channel. I am on TikTok. I am on LinkedIn. I'm a heavy digital user and I have been for several years, and I'm in my 50s. Okay, so it is not an age thing. So that's why this whole idea of digital native and digital immigrant, even though it was created by someone called Prensky came back and questioned the validity of his own theory. And he has introduced something called digital wisdom, which we can all have, regardless of our ages. So we can get rid of this idea that only the young people know certain things, the old people have to catch up. My parents are in their 80s and both of them use WhatsApp, and my mom goes to church on Zoom. You know, I taught my mom, I didn't teach my dad. My dad figured it out. My dad is 80 something and he fixes my Apple laptop, you know, at 80 something. You know, so it's a mindset thing. So it's not about age. It is about what you want to expose yourself to. And when you expose yourself and you get excited about technology and you get excited about creating and about posting things online, posting your opinion and reaching out to people from all across the world, you know, and having dialogue with them. These are things we can teach our children to do in organized ways. These are things we can do ourselves. And when we model this type of behavior as educators, they get excited about what they can do. And you can lead them into creating videos and so on, reflecting their country online, etc. These are the kinds of activities we want to get our students involved in. But I hold to this. Teachers must model it. It mustn't be something that we just tell them to do. We have to show them that we too are doing it.
You made a point just now. You said about creativity. Now, I am familiar with you, Dr. Charles, and I'm familiar with your sons and the realm of creativity that you're in. And I'm going to come back to my hat.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest and say that there are some teachers that themselves, their experience has dulled their creativity. That's what I'm going to say. We must be honest that sometimes
that is true too.
Our creativity was dull. And
that is true too.
I want to say that I'm familiar with your background, because I don't have a similar background, but I also have a background of being blessed with being surrounded with creatives. So being aware of being surrounded with creatives, my daughter is a fine artist. I have, through her, I have a lot of adopted sons, graphic artists, and so on. I am very well aware that that is not the norm. So again, when we talk about accountability, we as a ministry, administrations of schools have to be able to provide an environment that if a teacher let's think of creativity on a spectrum. And if a teacher has a limited or stunted creativity, and there will be some persons that are like that.
Yes, that is true.
Experience, it may be because they have never saw. I see Joya and this hi Joya, she spoke about attitude. And that's a fact. That's the reality of it is I, as a teacher, have experienced persons being I want to say teacher toxic because of my creativity, and it was like, no, let's jump in the boat together. And we also have to embrace that there are different types of creativity. There are persons that will be able to, I have a colleague that I may come with the big idea, but she will come with the details and be like, ask the questions,
Yes.
all of that is important. That's what we're talking about. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that we have to model for the children what to do. But the first thing we have to do is understand what it is that we need to do. Then have the opportunity to grow. And I always say, I give thanks to the 9 years that I was placed. And I did the school, I was saying, the Shepherd Primary, I did the stewardship of Mrs. Lorna Boyno, because as a teacher, as a young teacher, when I went there, I was allowed to explore and grow. So now I can stand on my feet. But I can say I've met many teachers that have not had the opportunity. And when we talk about mental health, let's talk about what teacher burnout looks like. So if you yourself are not your full you, then you cannot be the best to the children. And that is the reality. But what I'm very solution oriented. So the question and the conversations like these are very, very important, because I will say, I think I speak and say as a teacher, it feels sometimes that you're beat down by social media, but we have to have the opportunity to share our knowledge, to share what we do, to share our skill set, so that we build the community. So I'm glad that this conversation is happening, so that we know that it's a community in which we are focused on creating the best Barbadians with our children that are coming up. And we want them to stop being consumers and be creators. That's what we need, most definitely. Dr. Clark,
I'm gonna jump in here because there are a couple comments on the line and in the chat that I wanted to read. In addition to that, I'm going to give the persons in the chat an opportunity to ask some questions. Earlier when Dr. Charles was speaking, Diane Innes had actually agreed with her when she spoke about the students and the learning and so on. She said that the students use technology for gaming and social media interaction in academia. And she came back later and indicated that please note that those students were capable of being more efficient and effective in using their skills based on their attitude. Simone Daniel, I don't know if that's your full name or your first and last name, but it's Simone Daniel here. And she said, yes, it's about having a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, no matter one's age. Now, some persons may say to you that, yeah, age is only a number, but really and truly, I struggle sometimes with technology, and I try to show it. I struggle, but I think it was Dr. Clark that said, no, that some people are actually born into technology. They're born with technology. I remember my daughter was about 3, and I said to her, Alana, it's time for you to learn your initials. Her name is Alana Christina Weeks. And she said, but mommy, I already know my initials is A.C.W.com. And this is when she was also, they're born with technology, they're born into it. But let me give the persons that are listening on our platform the opportunity to ask some questions. Audience, any queries, any questions? You can either raise your hand or unmute your mic and identify yourself, and we'll be very happy for you to pose your questions. Any questions from our audience? Dr. Charles, you spoke about so many facets to digital education, and I think that was substantiated also when Dr. Clark mentioned that there's a multiplicity of applications, and digitization is in every sphere of human endeavors. And having to recognize that and say that, because you all agree to that aspect of it, do you think there's a room for this digital education action plan? I've been reading a little bit about it in Europe, but they've taken it to a whole new level, whereby the same way you're going to talk about education and reforming education, maybe it's time that you look at an action plan in terms of digitization. How do you respond to that? Anyone?
Well, I can't. I can't see.
You're dropping in and out, Dr. Charles.
Oh, I'm dropping in? Sorry. Are you hearing me?
In a little bit, yeah. Yes, we are.
You're hearing me now?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, what I was saying is that I can't speak to everything, in this forum, but what I could say is that as a part of our coming education reform, certainly digital education is going to feature very critically in education reform. And as time goes on, the public will hear more of that. Yes.
I wanted to say, or use a comparison somewhat. So my postgrad studies is in literacy education, and we would have had to look at implementation planning for literacy instruction. And I think that Dr. Charles referred in her opening speech about traditional literacy versus digital literacy. But I think that there's so many commonalities in these steps to addressing both, that you can,
yes,
for intents of purposes, use the framework for traditional literacy implementation, not what we have now. What we have really, really needs to be reformed really, really badly. And I'm glad that it's on the way. But the fact that there needs to be a needs assessment, and this needs assessment needs to be very thorough in a reading plan, and you need to do a needs assessment. And this needs assessment would be more than just, if it was digital, it would be more than just finding out if the child has the devices, their understanding, their conceptual understanding of what the processes needed for digital education. And then you have to make a plan. And that is what we seem to be in right now. And for reading, and then you implement, you evaluate, and you go back again. I think that we are the precipice of choosing to become once again leaders in the educational environment in the Caribbean, and I would say to the wider world. But I will still come back to my hat. In order to do that, we have to be honest about where we are, and we have to be honest about where we are in literacy, not just digital literacy, because I am saying that there are many.
They're connected. Yeah.
And at the end of, sorry.
No, you go ahead and finish now, Miranda.
Important component, key component of digital literacy in terms of consumption by our users, our children, is their ability to read, and there's no getting away from that. They can buffer for a little while, but I think that this age more than previous ages needs those key skills, and I personally think, from just like informally talking to teachers, that there are many schools that are in reading crisis. So this is something that has to be addressed, not separately, but together. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Joanne, you had your hand raised. Joanne has her hand raised there.
Yes.
Just on your mic, and go ahead, please.
Okay, so my question is, well, I'm glad that we're having this discussion. I've always stated that we needed to have an honest discussion, and I'm glad that Miranda had raised that as well. In relation to his honesty. Right now we're getting ready. Well, we've started to go back into the classroom face-to-face. And I've noticed that some teachers have gone back to the old model of chalk and talk and have not incorporated the technology as part of the class, as part of the learning modality, teaching and learning modality. Is this because to me, what would happen is that you send it back, you're stepping backwards. And I'm wondering if this is based on the infrastructure right now that we have within schools and low, where we have the bandwidth is not increased. Is it the case that teachers are more comfortable using that modality, which is chalk and talk, even though we went through many months of retooling ourselves, retooling and reskilling? Are we now going to say to students, okay, you know what, let's forget about that and only do this when we are at home, when we are online, but once we're in the classroom, we will go back to the old system? What is your recommendation now for educators in utilizing the technology within the classroom setting? Meaning, and when I say that, I mean it changing the face, because people are behaving as though we are going back to cramped classrooms, as opposed to recognize that COVID stated or has dictated that you social distance, you have smaller classroom student complement, and therefore utilizing a different style.
Dr. Clark, I wanted to have your take on those comments.
Well, it seems more in line with the with ladies who are deeply involved in early child education. But nonetheless, the reality is that it depends on where a person finds his or her comfort zone. And the whole comment with respect to the availability, to be honest about what we have right there on the floor when a person comes back into the classroom, what is it that they have at their disposal? Do they have the information they need? Do they have the technology they need? Um, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the students being exhausted about being online. So our teachers being sensitive to that and figure, well, that we'll come away from the screens for a little while. So again, there's so many different facets to these things, and I think without a real assessment of what's going on in the classroom, I think we'd be speaking out of turn. But there is the common practice that most of us seem to do, is that something is just a break away from the norm. Now, even within the context of the religious tradition, there are individuals who can't wait to get back into church as normal, right? As opposed to saying, well, how can we do this differently? We've been having the opportunity, like what Trinity is doing here. We've been having the opportunity to explore these other avenues. How can we look at it now rather than just as an experimentation? How can we look at it and see whether, at least to see the worth in it, and if we can take it to the next level, if we can make it something that is worth moving forward with. So, for example, using the church context, all of our services are designed for bricks and mortar, right? It is designed for a particular footprint. There are particular images around the place for persons to engage, stained glass windows, colors, various pieces of furniture that are designed in particular ways with various words on them or various images on them. So that is for in-person worship. That's when a person walks through the door, and these are the things that are intended to engage the individual. So the worship is designed with that footprint in mind. But then you come to the screen, and the easiest thing we can do is to lift what we're doing in the physical footprint and slam it onto the screen. So you move from a 3D to a 2D experience, and you've lost so much there. And so therefore, the idea is, I can't wait to get back. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. As my watch talks when it feels like. There's a negativity of
digital.
Turn it off.
Yeah, I was doing a devotion one morning, and Siri decides, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was embarrassed. But anyway, so we can't wait to get back into that 3D space, because that's all we know. So rather than try to find ways to design for the 2D space, we can't wait to get back into 3D space. And I think that's something that's probably happening, across all the various avenues, because we are comfortable with the 3D space. We don't mind dabbling in the technology, but we are comfortable in the 3D space. And we don't know how to fully operate in the 2D space. And that's where my reference to the young people came. It's not so much that because they're young, they know everything. It was just that the youth have been living with the 2D space, and they've been exploring the 2D space. Maybe they've not been doing anything that's really, quote unquote, in our minds, productive and useful, but that's their arena, the 2D arena. So it is a matter for us to see how we can take all the valuable 3D stuff and see how it can be redesigned, because it must be redesigned. It can't just be lifted. It must be redesigned to fit on the 2D space. And I think that's where the challenge is. And it takes a little bit more than just a little idea that's slapping something here and slapping something there. One educator said to me, I hope I quote her correctly, but she called what we were doing in education these last couple of months emergency remote learning, right? And it wasn't really online education. It was emergency remote learning where you take the in-person stuff.
It was that at first.
Pardon?
I said it was that at first. First, yeah.
Yes. And but you know, and so the whole idea is to how do we encourage persons to continue to evolve, to continue to develop an engagement for the 2D space.
Yeah, I want to support what Dr. Clark is saying. Yes, with the emergency remote teaching, that would have been our first call when we had to pivot immediately, you know, and find a way to reach the students because, you know, everybody was at home. And so that emergency remote teaching was used. But certainly as time went on, teachers began to be exposed to training. They began to be exposed to, you know, digital pedagogies, how they should teach online and some of the strategies they could use, some of the tools they could use, etc. And we went from that mindset or that practice of emergency remote teaching now to being a lot more purposeful in really designing our lessons in a way that would benefit our students in the online environment. But to answer the question that the young lady or the comment that she made, it is unfortunate. And that is exactly what I said in my opening remarks. I'm not sure if she was there at the beginning, but that is what I said. And that's what I was saying. I was so dismayed to hear some teachers, not all, some teachers saying that they couldn't wait to get back to doing what they did before, or some saying, what will I do now with all of my training and all of my investment in you know, digital technology and so on, because we're going back to books, etc. You know, it is really for the teacher, as Dr. Clark is saying, to redesign the space on where we can pull the best of both worlds. Are we saying to not consult a textbook again? No, of course not. You're still going to utilize textbooks until we go totally digital with those as well, because that's another thing that will probably come at some point, you know. But we, yes, consult textbooks still. There will be space still to use the chalkboard or the whiteboard if you have that. But that does not mean putting aside all of the digital technology. We have to find ways to use them both, to engage them. You know, if the Wi-Fi capabilities at the school, if that is poor, perhaps you would want to do the traditional approach at school and give students something to do online when they're at home. You know, so that they come to the classroom now having done an enriching activity. And not everything that is digital has to be online either. There are things that you can download and use right there that are not connected to the internet. So it does not mean that because you're using technology, you have to be using online technology, even though that is what perhaps we were doing for the last 2 years, right? So it's really about the teacher being as creative as possible in mixing the approaches to the best, for the betterment of the student. But there's no expectation from the ministry or any desire from the ministry that teachers would just put aside all that they've learned and return to the traditional approaches. That makes absolutely no sense. We would not have grown. We would not have grown if that's what we're going to do.
Agreed, but I want to jump in here and put a possible scenario, suggestion, or assertion. If merging the two, if as Dr. Clark said, that I meant that we were operating in emergency mode, remote emergency mode. And that was at first initially, because it definitely was that way. I would find it funny sometimes when person said teachers were doing nothing, when I know of class for teachers that did not stop teaching, that started like a week after we were home and they continued. But if this person was in emergency mode, I don't know if you've ever been in a mode where you've been intensely focused on getting through something. When the opportunity presents itself that you can remove yourself from that mode, then sometimes you release everything. I don't know if it's understood what I'm saying. So I think that for some circumstances, that is what has happened with some teachers. Some teachers, because they were and if we're going to be honest, some teachers we had 3 non-consecutive terms of online teaching. Some teachers conducted every term in emergency mode. Simply because some people, in terms of taking in technology, and I agree, regardless of age, take a little longer. I'm going to be very honest. There's a very savvy teacher at my school who has been teaching me Nearpod for a while, and it's not that I'm not intelligent, it's that I was existing and I was happy with Google Slides and I was doing really, really well with Google Slides. So she's been working with me and she's very patient, and I'm going to get it, but I am continuing on my path. But if I were in a mindset that I just get into this situation until I can get back to school. When I went back to school, then I would be like, that's it, I'm back. So we have to consider again what everyone is saying, the mindset of some students, and we have to be honest about the mindset of some teachers. What we have to do is unpack why that mindset is present. And is that mindset present because, and I'm going to dare to say that we as an educational system need within our teachers, we need to grow a culture of action research. When you grow a culture of action research, then you're actively looking for issues and not subjectively deciding what the issues are. And then based on those issues, then you're actively looking for solutions. And I'd like to share something that, like, you know, although I said I'm still on my Nearpod journey, one of the things that I recognize being in the ECE classroom, like, person said that the younger children were suffering. I don't agree. I did not totally agree, because I have seen growth in the students that attended regularly. That peel back happened with what you have when you saw families and homes that had limited support. There were different reasons why they had different support, limited support, but nevertheless, that limited support really impacted children more so than the actual online teaching. But so coming from the first time, I recognized that I was not a teacher that was interested in just posting an assignment for the children to do, because as an early childhood practitioner, I'm very aware of the use of learning centers. So I use my process of thinking, asking questions, and critical thinking, and looking for solutions. And I came up with a term which is evergreen online digital activities. And these activities are resources that you find, links that you find, and you put into the classroom, and there are links that the children can use over and over and over again, and for their benefit. Coming from that, I was able to find a few sites that were effective, but coming from that with a creator mindset, but there are things that I would like to create. So I am now seeking to try to collaborate with persons that have the skills in that area. I am not going to say that's the average teacher, because the reality of it is that some persons just were in that emergency mode, and when they went back from emergency mode, they released. So what we have to do is create an environment where most of the teachers, or all of the teachers, are in the action research mode, the solution mode, and then I think we will start to see a greater tide of change in education. That kind of inadvertently addresses a comment that spoke about equity. So equity is something that's always going to be an issue, but what the way that we can address equity is being able to assess appropriately, accurately, the needs of a different schools, different teachers, different students, and then garner our fashion solutions. So schools, education, I don't believe that it can ever be a one-size-fits-all situation. Once we understand that, then we're starting to address equity.
All right, you answered Benita's question quite nicely, where she says that on the chat that some of the panelists mentioned equity being a challenge, and how do we address this as a nation? How does the Ministry of Education plan to address this? So you answered that quite nicely. But Simone also had actually posted a comment in the chat where she says, I'm hearing a lot of terms such as digital literacy, digital learning. Is it digital learning, or is it learning via facilitation through a digital classroom? Also, not all education can be digital. She speaks to doctors, dentists, skills tradesmen, which still need in-person and hands-on. Children learning how to write letters and numbers for the first time, and is that not correct? So she's mentioned quite a few things. Certainly with the hands-on practice and training for the various professions. But I know that I've been exposed to in Canada, whereby you have a problem and you literally dial a number, you get I have some feedback if right now, but if you can dial a number, book an appointment online, then the doctor tells you what time they're going to come online and speak to you. If you have blood work, they send it to the lab. If there's some medication that they're going to assign to you, they actually send it to the pharmacy, and then you will go and collect it. So there is that aspect of doctrine supposed to align. Now, if you're talking about the training itself, that's a different story, but they have actually moved into, I guess you can call it, the digital age. I must confess though that I didn't I didn't really like it, because I wanted to be in a position to spend more time with the doctor or to be speaking to them very frankly. But of course, they have specific appointments, and I felt like I was being rushed through the whole process. I'm going to come to this point here where I don't see. Hi, Dr. Clark. Yes.
I just wanted to pick up on your point, because it's a valid point. Because it's true that the topic is education, but if you're looking at the whole digitization, it's a very wide conversation, and it's interesting because I was in touch with a medical school recently, and they've moved to a place where they don't use cadavers anymore, or they don't even use the little models. They actually have all the training for their surgeons online. Actually, it's a video thing that they're doing. So there's no end of the application of what we're dealing with. And I think this is one of the things that I was trying to say to us, that we can't stay in yesterday and try to imagine tomorrow, because we're always going to be saying, well, there's certain things that you can't do. And that's not true. More and more, the whole digital world is showing us that you can do almost virtually any and everything through the whole digital technology. I remember there was an experiment sometime, I think it was like, it was somewhere between 2001 and 2006, where they had this .com guy. And the experiment was to see if a person can live in their apartment for an entire month without leaving the apartment, right? And so everything he wanted, he was able, by the use of technology, to order in, to do whatever. And they realized that, yeah, you can do that. So there is that sense in which we can almost be without any kind of human contact. And there's where the other side comes in. And you just referenced that when you spoke about a visit to the doctor and needing that social connection. No, you need that because you come from a place where that has been the norm, right? What about those who will be born into that new arena? They wouldn't know about what you're talking about, and their expectation would not be for that physical interaction. So that's why I keep saying that we are preparing ourselves for something that we don't really fully grasp. And like I think someone mentioned earlier, that whole dial-up noise that the phone used to make when it's making the connection in order to go online. Anybody who would have passed on at that time would be wondering, would be expecting that that's how computing happens today. And if they were to come back and realize that you didn't have to do it, they would be shocked, more than likely. So there is a sense in which you have to realize that this thing is traveling, and it is not just developing gradually. There are leaps that are taking place. And so one has to be very mindful of this and realize that what's being asked of us is to have an extremely broad and open way of being and looking at the world, and realize that virtually any and everything is possible. There's a war in Ukraine at this point in time, and it's a horrible experience. But that war could be fought by individuals sitting in some safe environment using drones, and nobody has to go out and shoot at anybody else. That's where our technology has. And so all this, when one has a conversation about technology, one has to be able to embrace all of this, because there is the wonderful side and there's the horrible side. And we've got to be able to be mindful of this as we have our conversations.
Panelists, thank you very much. I'm going to give each of you 1 minute to give your final, that was your minute, 1 minute to give your final comments. And I'm gonna start in the reverse with Miranda, just 1 minute to give your comments, your wrap-up comments, please.
Yes, I think I'm gonna finish up with a visual projection. I'm not sure if anyone here, I'm sure there are persons here that are fans of Archie comics. And there was a particular issue in Betty Digest, where the parents came and Betty was sitting in very modern looking clothes. It was written many years ago. And she was speaking about, is that Betty going to school together? She said, no, we're online today. And if I would have gotten that 5-10 years ago, for me, it would have been a real fantasy. But I want to say we are here. But in saying that we are here, we cannot pretend that the realities of some of our students, some of our teachers have disappeared. So I am going to always ground myself in saying that we can make a difference if we're honest and accountable about where we are and where we can go a whole together. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Clark, I know you just had a couple minutes, but I'll come back to yourself as just your 1 minute wrap up, please.
I can pick up on where she left. You said, yes, we are here. And the reality is that here is not going anywhere. At least it's not going back, it's going forward. And the only response that we can have to this is that we need to be able to let go what we have carried and dragged along and see what it is that we need to embrace as we move forward. Thank you.
And finally, Dr. Charles, your 1 minute wrap up.
Okay, so even as we let go and we embrace, we must at the same time revisit and understand who we are. We must not lose sight of our humanity, even within the context of the digital environment. We must not allow ourselves to be so taken over by the tools and the technological advances that exist that we forget our humanity. And I think one of the critical aspects of digital education that we must not forget is that whole element of digital identity, digital well-being. How do I take care of myself? How do I take care of my loved ones? How do I preserve my sense of humanity, my sense of fairness, my sense of integrity? All of this is very much grounded in a digital education, and we must not forget that, because as we move forward, we must still embrace all of those rich treasures and values that make us who we are today.
Thank you so very much. I now invite one of the members of the Conversation Committee, Mrs. Lana Fingal, to do a brief summary for us. Lana?
Hi, good night, everyone. I just want to use this opportunity to thank all of you, especially our panelists, Dr. Denise Charles, Dr. Michael Clark, and Ms. Miranda Fergus for joining us tonight and really having quite an interesting discussion on digital education. Several points were raised, such as, and I keep hearing one that's very interesting to me that Dr. Denise Charles keeps reiterating over and over, and she keeps talking about safeguarding our digital identity. And I think that's something that we take for granted and that a lot of people are not aware of and perhaps don't embrace in the way that they should. And for me, this conversation was particularly interesting because I have two sons as well. And both of them were obviously impacted with the shift to digital education. The first one was about to go to Canada to do his degree, and quite disappointing to him. He spent the first year here having to do his first year online, and I could see how it was a challenge for him, and I could see how he struggled with transitioning to this online learning. But over time, at the end of the first semester, I realized he had become a little bit more comfortable with it and he'd begun to embrace it a bit more. And I would say that at the end of it, I think he came out of it pretty decent. So for me, I would say that it was a learning experience for all of us. And I was quite happy that the teaching fraternity was able to embrace it and to grow with it. So some of the points I heard tonight that were a little bit worrisome, and I'm glad that Dr. Charles and some of the others picked up on it as well, is the possibility of possibly just going back to the way we did things before, because we you know, I was having a conversation with a colleague earlier this week, and I was saying to her that when we did our strategic planning, there was always this piece for pandemic planning. And whenever I got to that stage, I always thought, oh, when am I ever going to experience a pandemic? You know, I kind of skimmed through it and kind of just did it because it was required, never realizing that it would come to fruition and we would be 2 years into this pandemic. So my point to the colleague and my point to the group as well is that coming out of the pandemic, we shouldn't go back to doing things as we did before. I think we should embrace what we learned and prepare ourselves for the future using what we learned coming out of the pandemic as our base. So thanks to all of you who joined us tonight. Thanks to our panel. And I now hand over to Michael Brown, who will do our closing prayer. Thank you.
Thank you,
Before
Lana.
before we do that, Michael, I'm going to ask Diane Holligan to just give a vote of thanks for us, please, before you get there. So right after Diane gives the vote of thanks, then I'll have you do the closing prayer, please. Diane?
Good evening. Reverend Bernard Bean, Mrs. Bean, Chair of the Conversations Committee, our most valued invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to offer thanks on this occasion. I extend sincere thanks to everyone for participating in tonight's conversation on the topic Digital Education, our Present, our Future. To our distinguished guests, Dr. Denise Charles, Reverend Dr. Michael Clark, and Ms. Miranda Fergus, we say a warm thank you. Dr. Charles, we had the opportunity to hear your thoughts and your interpretation of the subject matter. This was definitely encouraging for all of us. Thank you. Reverend Dr. Clark, you continue to enlighten our minds and our ways of thinking. Thank you for sharing your opinions with us. Ms. Miranda Fergus, we are inspired by your thought-provoking insight and your excellent coverage of this topic. Thank you. We know that events like this cannot happen overnight. It requires planning and a keen eye for detail. With this in mind, we are fortunate to have a dedicated team that make up the Conversation Committee. Special thanks to Mrs. Lana Fingal, who gave us a sound summary of the details discussed. Thanks to Mrs. Annette Weeks, our moderator, for her adept ability to manage the proceedings and keep the conversation flowing. Thanks in advance to Mr. Michael Brown, who will follow with the closing prayer. Sincere thanks to the technical team from our church, the Church of the Holy Trinity. They always work quietly behind the scenes. Thank you for your support. To you, our online participants and general audience joining us via Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, we thank you for participating. Once again, I want to say how grateful we are to all the speakers on this forum. We thank you for being here with us this evening. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll now have our closing prayer, please.
Thank you, Chair Annette. The bow heads, please. Almighty God, our Creator, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for enabling us to have been at a productive conversations meeting. We thank you for providing the presenters with the intellect and confidence to share their knowledge. So we can be productive in what we've heard tonight. Let us develop a better society. continue to be our sustainer and redeemer as we journey into the season of Lent. Continue to guide us. And I ask you to join me in saying the grace. May the grace of our Lord
Jesus Christ,
Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God,
and
the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, which is all now and forevermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. That is our presentation tonight of Conversations, Digital Education, Our Present, Our Future. Thank you so much. And we look forward to you joining us every first Tuesday of the month for Conversations. Good night, everyone, and have a blessed day tomorrow and the rest of the week.